welcome to this week's episode of A Bazaar Podcast. To start off with, I am one of your hosts, MetallFenix, and with me I have my co-hosts.
My name is Sixten. I'm one of the co-hosts of A Bazaar Podcast.
My name is Walter. I'm the other co-host. Hi.
And then finally we have our guest this week, Aska. How about you do a little introduction? Tell the new listeners something about yourself.
Hey guys. Well, I guess I'm like an avid bazaar enjoyer from Serbia. And I'm really happy that you guys invited me to join you in on a discussion on this nice Saturday morning.
We're very happy to have you here, and we can start off with what have you been playing this week?
For me, I've been experimenting around Dooley a lot. I felt like Dooley is gonna get hit really hard with everything being bunked, but I was wrong, and I'm very happy about being wrong about that. What about you guys?
You could have you been playing any like particular boards with Dooley? Anything that's stood out?
Definitely T-Rexes. I feel like I know this is going to sound a bit mean, but a lot of the new players coming in on the open beta, I don't think they're ready for item destruction as well as Dooley can do it, especially with optic fibers. And like now, Robotics Factory, you can get a very fast munching T-Rex Mamasaur with a double cast, and it just disrupts everybody's boards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, that's
Mamasar is
definitely.
very strong.
I don't think dinos have been back in a very long time since fiber optic. I think they re-added the item twice without adding it back in, and that's kind of an important piece. But I'm sure we'll get.
It's all fixed now. It's completely
it's amazing.
fixed.
We'll
Yeah.
we'll get
Just
more
fix
into
All the
that.
bugs with it are fixed, which is really
We'll get more
nice.
into that later, and we can go on with Sixten. What have you been playing?
Dooley. I loved this. Is the most fun I've had with Dooley in a very long time. In fact, it might be the most fun I've ever had. The only core I don't find fun to play is Armored Core, and the only core I don't play at all is Companion, but that is because I don't have the courage to try and learn it. But everything else, whether it be Force Field, Drill, um, Motherboard, Cybersecurity, Flamethrower, just Tempo, Aggro, Pulse Rifle. Like there are so many avenues to explore Dooley with. Pylon, for example, it's an item I've been very impressed with. So yeah, I think Dooley is in a very healthy spot right now. I would compare him to Vanessa in the last patch, where you can play so many
Don't
different
do
lines.
that. We're just gonna get nerfed again with Dooley. Like we're
I
never
know.
gonna get.
They're
We're not
gonna,
gonna get to play him for
yeah.
months again.
They're gonna make Force Field
Hopefully
a
they're not listening.
Pygmalion item.
I wanted to ask
Walter.
you.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, we
I
can
was about to
go.
ask you. Like my opinion is that the critical core is like the worst core on Dooley. It does nothing other than stand all the way to the left. So I was about to ask you, how do you make that work?
So why I like crit core is because I am a gold skill enjoyer, and sometimes when you low roll the gold skills, you have to pick a crit skill, right? Like your items have plus 15 crit, like or your right most have 24% crit, and then the crit core suddenly gets very attractive because it there is inbuilt scale, like that is a form of scaling in that it charges faster the more crit you have. So and then the crit core is I think the best core for having your core as the win condition. So if you play motherboard, which scales the core's damage, crit core will be the best core for that playstyle because it's just gonna go faster and faster and then crits and crits and crits. So I also agree it's
I
a
was
weak
always
core.
so scared to try
Yeah.
motherboard with the core. I was thinking like the scaling is too slow, but I
Me
never
too. So
did the
it
math.
was
It-
actually my Twitch chat who convinced me to try it. So the way motherboard works is you really want to upgrade it to gold,
Yeah.
but if you get it at silver before level 7, it is super good. Like you will get at least I would say 8 wins minimum. But if
Mhm.
you find some kind of extra bit of juice, like a fiber optics, some kind of crazy skill, you can get 10 wins with that for sure. So
It's
I'm very
Or an
impressed by that.
obsidian
also
enchant to double the scaling is also
and
really insane.
Oh, yeah.
with every patch, it only seems like GPU keeps getting better and better because it got harder to find haste. Period, and then GPU didn't get bonked, and GPU is like the primary
Mhm.
into making sure the motherboard is going to be consistent, and then if you have a gold motherboard and you find a metronome with like a pulse
Oh yeah,
rifle, it
metronome
goes
makes it crazy.
insane.
Metronome makes everything crazy. Like I have a friend who loves to play Pig, and when I asked her about her favorite items, she was like, "When I find metronome for fixer upper."
Yeah, I mean,
That is to
metronome
say
is
with
for sure one of the metronome is for sure one of the strongest cards in the whole game at this point.
And the
It's
fiber optics.
yeah. I mean,
That's
I
insane
rate
too.
metronome. I think metronome is good on almost every single dually board. There's almost, whereas like I can't say the same for fiber optics. But hold on, let me talk about what
yeah,
Go.
Walter.
I've loved this patch. You can tell from my avatar, look at the smile on my face. I got my power drill. I am drilling holes in people's skulls. X25 drill, their items are X0 fixer upper. Like I am having a blast with this patch, I think. Especially since Uzi, now they hot fixed it back to 2 seconds. I'm fully in. Like I am having so much fun playing Dually this patch, and I've been like a power drill pylon lover since the very start, right? Like I've loved pylon. I love this card. It's like the perfect. Okay, I'll say that it's the only card in out of Dooley's cards that give you two simultaneous but different drill triggers, and that's like a
Wait, what about
What about
Nitro
Chemsnail? Excuse me,
okay,
Chemsnail?
sure.
and
Okay,
Nitro?
Chemsnail. I'm
Nitro,
talking
yeah.
about. Well, yeah, but
It gives
Metro
you
doesn't.
fire and charge.
On which one?
Nitro. It
Charge
gives you
isn't
Yeah,
fire
but
and
a
charge.
drill trigger.
charge isn't a drill trigger though.
Isn't it? I thought
No,
I
No.
saw it.
It's just
it's
haste. Yeah,
the
yeah.
only one
Okay,
that
okay, okay.
isn't, but
I mean,
it's
I think Nitro is
probably
really good. I think Nitro
Okay,
is really
okay,
good
okay.
too. And
In
yes,
that case,
okay,
Chemsnail.
okay.
yeah,
I
sure.
omitted Chemsnail, but I'm trying not to have Chemsnail on my final board. But
Dude, you
you get
forgot
what I'm
about Bomb
saying, though.
Squad. Bomb Squad is also haste and burn.
It's
No,
true.
It
okay, no,
is
but they're
Bomb
not
Squad.
simultaneous. But Bomb Squad, they're not simultaneous. Bomb
They
Squad
can be.
creates a
Well,
Bomb Squad creates a haste trigger when something goes next to it, and then it creates a burn trigger when something goes off. The point is that when it's simultaneous triggers of two different types, that increments drill
Okay,
sure.
for
so
4 seconds per
Because you can
trigger.
get
yeah,
you can get
just
frozen in between. So
And Metal, what have
no,
you been playing?
it's also
Before we...
I will just mention because it's very important context for, and I'm sure we'll bring it up again later too. But for any listeners, Power Drill specifically has a very unusual interaction where normally every item in the bazaar has an internal cooldown that determines that anything that happens to the item, such as it being charged or it activating, can only happen at most in one increment every 0.2 seconds. However, Power Drill has a rare exception where it's got separate internal cooldowns for every different source of charging. So when a nitro goes off and burns both players, the 2 ticks of burn will still take 0.4 seconds to charge the power drill by 2 seconds. But when pylon goes off, since it simultaneously slows and hastes, it means that it charges 2 increments in 0.2 seconds. And if you, for example, had a fiery pylon, it'll charge 6 seconds in a 0.2 second increment, which is the thing Walter is talking about, where simultaneous triggers are uniquely relevant to power drill and only power drill.
That was a really good explanation. That was like that was some
very nice.
classroom action.
Yeah.
That was really good.
So that's
I just like shut up immediately, and I was like, I'm listening.
that's the
You
deep
got
lore
my
on why
attention.
power drill is so difficult to evaluate compared to other charge items. Like I do actually Trebuchet is affected by the same thing. I watched someone
Yep.
earlier this week have a obsidian dive way board with trebuchet, which gives the same effect because it's a weapon and hastes simultaneously, so it charges trebuchet twice per increment. And the same is true for Zorakrid, which is why the new Vanessa cards, which we'll get to later, have a far greater impact on trebuchet than they do on anything else that Vanessa can run. Because yeah, we got two things that can potentially do double triggers, or especially Soractrid doesn't need an enchant to be double triggering trebuchet. But that's a good lead into I am the resident Vanessa enjoyer. I've been mostly playing Vanessa this week, and it's especially because out of all of the Vanessa boards in the game, the most fun that I'd had in the past was when Cove was meta. It might be hard to believe for anyone who's more recent to the Bazaar, especially if you've only played in open beta, but the Cove actually used to be really meta because you could reliably upgrade it to Diamond, which would mean that you could trigger it for like 600 to 1,000. Like, it was Fixer Upper. It was the OG Fixer Upper, belonged to Vanessa. And it was so much fun to play. And it's because I just like doing creative stuff with weird aquatic cards. So when they told me that they were dropping an expansion pack that was packed with nothing but weird aquatic cards, I was like, I gotta do it. I gotta play it, and we'll get to this later, but Arbalest is like my new favorite item. Arbalest, my beloved, kills every pig, deals 14,000 damage when it goes off. Just shoots
If it goes
people,
off.
they go boom, always goes off.
Like, I don't play Vanessa much, but I feel like Arbalest, by the time I run into it, I already have a board that's kind of pre-made, like already fixed, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. And I feel like I would disrupt it by adding it. I always go like, nah, nah, nah. It's day 10. I'm already close to 10 wins. I'm not gonna do it, and I never
Yeah,
go for it.
it's a really interesting one because I think I'll talk about this more later too, but I think right now Vanessa has this interesting dichotomy when it comes to she can do single weapon, and single weapon varies both depending on what your single weapon is, but it also varies depending on if you run single weapon crow's nest or single weapon with aquatic support package, because something like a scaled up seaweed can do the same thing as the crow's nest does in that it can provide you with the sustain for your single weapon to do the killing. Or of
It's
course with
slow,
yeah, and
isn't
with
it?
what did you say?
It's a bit slow, isn't it? The seaweed. I find that if it, whenever I try to rely on seaweed, even though it scales to like I don't know how many thousands of healing, I sometimes don't manage to get it off because it's like a 6 or 7 second cooldown.
Definitely, and that's why oftentimes you rely more on it in the mid game, and in the hyper late
Yeah.
game you oftentimes cut it. But it also was one of the items that benefited more from the item wide 1 second cooldown increase that we'll talk more about in the topic of the week. But the other thing is, outside of just regular single weapon options, like previously it was double barrel and then we had flagship, there are also the weirder single weapons, namely um, shark ray, torpedo, and arbalest. And we'll see. I haven't tried the miniature sub post hotfix, but maybe there's something there now. But the main thing about those three especially is that Shark Ray gets the worst scaling, but has the least conditions to work since it doesn't have ammo. Torpedo is in the middle, where it has the second best scaling, but you have to run a large aquatic that activates for it to have reload. And then Arbalest has the strictest conditions because you have to run actual reload or ammo skills, but it also has the most aggressive scaling of almost any item in the game at 100 per instance of haste once it gets to diamond. So, because of that wide overlap, if you know that you're angling into any of the many variations of single weapon, and you also know that you're saving gunpowders because the arbalest only ever really needs to have 2 or at most 3 ammo, or you know that you're picking up depth charge because it works with both arbalest and torpedo and double barrel, or you're picking up gunner because it also works with dive weight. You actually have a lot of options that mean that at the time you find arbalest, you already also have all of the supporting pieces that let you put it on the board straight away and just power spike to close out the 9th and 10th win. And that's a lot of the time how I use it.
Well, that's similar to the way you would prep your both your inventory and your board for a railgun playing dually. But
Yes,
earlier, of course,
exactly.
you're looking for it on day 3, 4.
I also realized before we move on, I should probably mention that so this patch I had a 20 10-win streak on dually. I
Yeah.
exclusively played dually, so 20 games in a row of 10 wins. And the by far MVP that saved many almost losses was force field. So my favorite item and what I've been playing the most and forcing has been force field. I should just add that here in
Yeah,
this,
that
then
will
we
be
can move on to
perfect. We
topic
can
of the week.
dive more into that when we get to
Yeah.
the state of the meta, but we'll start with the topic of the week. So I mentioned that I think seaweed is one of the items that have benefited a lot from the 1 second cooldown increase to everything. We might call that the great bonkening. If we mention bonk to anyone, it refers to a skill dropped by the PvE encounter Thug, which increases the cooldown of your opponent's items by 1 second. So in the community, we've taken to calling something getting a 1 second cooldown nerf getting bonked. And this patch, a lot of items got their cooldowns increased by 1 second. So we've said that they all got bonked. So that's what we're kind of referring to. And we thought we'd talk a bit about the theoretical implications of kind of what that means for how you evaluate items. And I know that Walter was especially excited to start off on this topic, so you can kind of bring us
Yeah,
into it, and then we'll offer some feedback.
for sure. I mean, I think some key takeaways for me are multicast. Like this is like a multicast meta in a way. Like the way that the way that everything getting bonked kind of plays out is that most of the most powerful stuff in the game is attached to triggered effects that happen, when an item or a skill or something goes off. And the result of that is that everything getting bonked means that the density of those triggers go way down. Except in one case, which is when your item has multicast. And what multicast does is stack more triggers per time the cooldown goes off, so that in effect multicast items have been nerfed way less than other items relatively. So, and the same is true for charge items, but it's a little more complicated because a lot of them were nerfed past a breakpoint in charge. Like, so that's it's a little bit more murky. But almost every single item that gives multicast or has multicast is stronger post bonk. And I especially want to point out pulse rifle, which wasn't bonked because it was bonked in the previous patch. It was moved to 5 seconds. Is now one of the fastest casts per second items in the entire game, even with Uzi reverted back to 2 seconds. So Pulse Rifle is a key card for this patch because it can create a density of triggers through metronome or through enchants or through whatever you want to put next to it that's going to trigger when it goes. And those type of effects tend to be, or at least for Julie and Vanessa, those type of effects tend to be some of the strongest stuff, which is when you haste, do XYZ. When you burn, do XYZ. Like all of these type of triggered effects are the meta, right? That's what Keg is. When you burn, do XYZ. Like Arbalest is when you haste, do XYZ. Right? Like, so you really want the multicast cards to generate that density of triggers that allows you to do the most powerful stuff. And I think that we've seen that play out. I really love Pulse Rifle this patch. we've seen the Vanessa multicast ammo items be really strong, and Beast of Burden is back, and that's also a multicast item, and it also seems pretty strong. So we don't have to get into Pig quite yet, but yeah, I think this
I
might be the
think
multicast patch. It's the multicast meta. That's what I'm calling it.
I'm thinking that the only reason we haven't noticed such a big impact in multicast items before is because the meta was double barrel everybody down before 3 seconds into the fight,
But
and
that
then they
is
wouldn't even
also
get off. Now we have freedom to use multicast items without dying before using them.
it's also
True,
Well,
very
true.
double barrel
interesting.
was
Yeah,
technically a
exactly.
multicast item itself, so it was a
Um,
multicast
I think
meta. But yeah,
the
But it was the only one.
yeah,
yeah,
and
Yeah,
I
the
yeah,
only
it
think
one,
was
the only
it
one.
was the best one though
kind
by a
of
lot.
the main thing to mention about multicast as a mechanic in general and why it's so powerful in the bazaar is as a sort of core concept of evaluating cards, we usually talk about additive scaling and multiplicative scaling. If you have an item that deals 60 damage and you add 60 damage, you've scaled additively. And that's a form of linear scaling where no matter how many times you do it, you're going to have added the same amount. It goes from 60 to 120 to 180 to 240. But as soon as you start multiplying it, so say you have a 60 damage item and you add multicast, it goes up to 120, and then you add crit, instead of going up to 180, it goes up to 240, and so on and so forth. And that was one of the main principles leveraged by both Double Barrel and another popular single weapon choice, Flagship, as well as a third, at least very common choice, which was Cutlass, because single weapon always focused on multiplying your damage by having a weapon, adding crit, adding cooldown reduction, and then adding damage. And if you also had multicast, you got to double dip, or in terms of flagship, typically quadruple dip, on those three things you added on to being equivalent to kind of six-fold scaling or 24-fold scaling, which is what makes it able to get so out of hand so quickly. And I think now that every other item got worse and multicast items already had this really powerful interaction, it makes a lot of sense that we're seeing them sort of start to take over the meta.
The gold tier items that allow multicast are also a big change since you were able to acquire them only at diamond before, and now we can get them in gold shops.
Yeah, they're more available in addition to being more powerful. That's actually a really good insight too.
Yeah,
So
and
it
there's.
makes
So
sense.
Mhm.
Metal, were you going to
Sorry.
bring up like how we evaluate
Yeah,
boards
and
in
so I
this?
think
Yeah.
another thing that could be interesting to have a look at in relation to this multicast method that we're kind of in is that me and Sixten, we designed this principle that I've put up on kind of the screen there, which we call the FAST principle, which divides boards into four different categories. You can kind of think it as one of those power rankings in a battle manga or something where they rate the strength and the speed or whichever factors. But in our case, we gauge force as the raw ability of a build to defeat an opponent. Acceleration is how fast the build starts and how fast it is once it's going. Stamina, which is how long the build can keep going for. And tankiness is how resistant the build is to opposing force. And
In
I
this post
think,
on Reddit, was it your post?
yeah, it was
I
Sixten.
Yes.
was like,
Sixten
this is so
posted that.
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
I elaborated on all these points, but Metal is the one that came up with the acronym and all, like making it easy to understand. Basically, he wrote the definitions here.
So smart.
And I think it's especially noteworthy right now because another thing of what multicast items enable is that if you want a build to be very high in acceleration, specifically the second part of acceleration, how fast an engine is once it's started, multicasts can be a core way of doing that, because regardless of if your multicast is the trigger to your engine, the payoff to your engine, or in some cases even both at the same time, what ends up happening is that when you have your engine going with a payoff, either a multiplied engine itself or a multiplied payoff, the growth becomes four or fivefold as well, with flagship being a great example. There are two core Vanessa abilities that you're really looking out for if you want to enable both double barrel and flagship, but especially flagship, which is usually improvised weaponry and tempering, which both give damage either when you crit or when you just attack. And the thing that becomes so crazy is if you have a flagship with silencer and haste, and it shoots 4 times, and all 4 are crits, you'll get 4 damage increases, and the next time you shoot, you'll shoot 4 times, which means that you actually benefited 16 times from just the one volley going off, compared to what a single weapon with a single activation would have done. And when the entire meta slows down, it means that you have a much larger window for acceleration to matter. If a lot of the time fights ended in 3 or 4 seconds, you might not have time to accelerate no matter how fast your acceleration is. But if consistently a fight draws out to 9 or 10 seconds, and you're allowed to rampantly accelerate that whole time, it'll really quickly get out of control.
I have to say that force field dually kind of prevents that. If you
Yes.
win with force,
Yes,
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 please.
And
that's
yeah,
true.
no, you go first. Yeah,
You're our guest,
yeah.
Aska.
Aska, you can explain your
Well,
reasoning first, and then we'll analyze
I,
it, because I think you're completely correct.
I was just thinking, because if you're playing force field on dually, you want to win in one, maybe 2 hits. If you have to have like a third hit on the force field go off, it will usually kind of wane down on the amount of armor you have, and you usually start off with like either the skill that says defense grid, where
Yeah,
Yeah.
it gives you your armor comparative to how much health you have, or the other one that says when you use a large item, then get like what is the name of the skill? Get
Reserve shield.
reserve shield. And
Mm-hmm.
both of those, like the reserve shield, it triggers after the first hit, so you want your second hit to kill, but you don't want to give your opponent any time to buff up and to start ramping. Like especially fixer uppers, you can kill them only if the fixer uppers don't move before you
yeah.
hit them with the force field.
And this is an important, I think some people have a hard time because force field has kind of had a transformation. In the past, when tape was a dually item, the way force field used to be was it was like a ramping build, like it was more of a control build where you scaled the tape with armored core, and then your force field got stronger and stronger over time. But
Yeah.
now that tape is gone, it's become more of a like aggro OTK build where you want to have upfront shield and kill them fast. So force field, the item, has kind of gone from being collectively known as like a bit of a slower build that needs to scale to the opposite. You want upfront, just burst, and that is why it now is countering those builds that are scaling. Like it's kind of interesting, right? Like it has
Yeah.
become the thing it's worth to destroy. Like force field used to be countered by force field, but now force field is the new fixer upper basically. So that it's very interesting. But
Well,
And it's a
you
really
can
can I
correct
fast
just
there.
can I
one.
just jump in, and I think I kind
Sure.
of have a explanation for why that might be. I think it's so what we've seen happen in the last meta, and I think in this meta it's true as well. So because the speed of the acceleration that's possible the start of combat has become increasingly more and more and more important in the last couple patches, right? So things that happen instantly at start of combat are, in my mind, at an all-time premium. And that's both
Yeah.
what you want to do as for example, a force field build, but it's also what you want to do to counter a force field build. So what's happened is that you should, okay, when you're deciding between options, the value of the options that give you start of combat disruption has continually gone up and up and up because A, the acceleration is insanely powerful, and B, because the natural predator to acceleration strategy is a one-hit kill strategy like the force field, right? So both of those things are countered if you're an acceleration build like drill, for example, which is like the quintessential like acceleration focused build where you want to start as fast as possible and you want to go as fast as possible. Your item at the end, when you click the recap at the end of the fight, you wanted to say X30 under your drill, right?
Yeah.
That's how you know you did a good job. So that's the quintessential like acceleration build, and what's become more and more important for it is not having more damage, not having more burn, whatever. It's
Just triggers.
start faster, yeah, exactly. Start a combat. Icicling you into invig, into quick freeze, into do you know what I mean? Or rust into slow freeze, into
Frost,
whatever. And my drill
rigged.
is yeah, and my
Yeah.
drill or rigged, yeah, whatever you can get your hands on. Magma core into frostfire, into invig, in like basically you can create as dually with power drill a chain of triggered effects that disrupt your opponent while simultaneously starting your engine at the very beginning of combat, and that's the like that's the gold standard for like a super good drill, right? A super good drill starts instantly and CCs all of your opponent's whole board right at the start of combat, and that's both to counter a one hit kill like force field, but also to counter acceleration build like a dive weights Vanessa, right? That's trying
So
to
Metal,
Yeah.
charge something up.
could you bring back the graph there or the fast thing? I also thought
Yeah.
just for like the viewers who are like unfamiliar with like, okay, what is an example of an item that is like so because Walter said that like power drill is like the quintessential acceleration item. So maybe we just run down like, okay, what is a force item, what is a stamina item, what is tank, and it's just in case there are viewers who are a bit confused.
Well, I
So
think the main thing is that
maybe
it's kind of hard to evaluate, um, because at the same time,
Like I would say a force build would be like Square Pig is like a force build.
yes,
yes, but
crook is like
at the
the
same
force
time,
item.
drill can also oftentimes represent the force of many builds if the
That is
drill
true.
is the thing that kills
Like
something
a
once it
whammy.
accelerates.
So
And
Big
I
whammy
can
is a force
yeah,
button.
But
I
I
can
get
give
what
some
you're
examples
saying,
just quick.
Metal, but yeah.
Like for me, the most pure acceleration item in the game is metronome. Like I think we can all agree that
Yeah, okay.
99% of times metronome will make your build faster. Like sure you can enchant it with obsidian and then it becomes a force item, but metronome is like the most pure acceleration item. And then there is a skill called rush, which is like at the start of the game give a weapon haste. That is also like
yeah,
pure
so I think
acceleration.
you're wrong in terms
Rigged
of
as well.
Oh
choosing
yeah, rigged.
metronome as the acceleration item. The acceleration item is holster, because it's an
Okay.
item that only provides, or in terms of start of combat acceleration at least, it's an item that only
Yeah.
provides raw acceleration, whereas metronome is also a good example of stamina
That's
oftentimes,
true.
because
Yeah,
it's
that's
an
true.
item with
Metal. Yeah.
uncapped uses that can be used as a trigger to affect other things, and stamina can be kind of how well do you scale. So in a motherboard build, the metronome is actually your source of stamina more than anything, because it makes sure that your motherboard build won't
Yeah,
not
I
be
think
able to keep up with
it
something.
might be
Yeah, I
more
think
helpful
Sixten
to talk
Sixten.
about
maybe.
it in
Yeah.
terms of
What
builds
about
and not in
Aiden?
terms of single items. Because
First
like
Aiden is like the stamina. Like Aiden is basically stamina, I think. Or are we
No,
getting
so
into the weeds of things here?
again, there I
Okay.
would definitely disagree. Aiden is
Okay.
usually played as an item that you use because he's a good trigger, which makes him
Yeah.
acceleration for the core.
I would
Okay,
say
okay.
I love
But-
using him to start off a build. Like
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's also
think
true.
it's
Yeah,
usually
yeah.
the first item to touch grass,
Okay,
let's
that's
say,
true.
and start hitting you.
Aiden
Okay, but
and
that's why
Uzi are great examples of acceleration usually.
Yeah, Uzi definitely.
that's why it's so like that's why I'm saying like we shouldn't evaluate it on an individual card. Individual cards
No,
can be used
yeah.
differently
Yeah.
in different builds
Because
to
it
Mm.
be
It's
depends on
build,
the
specific.
yeah.
context
We
It's
of
should
the
use
more
build.
about
builds instead. Yeah.
like Square Peg is like a force build. Drill
Yes.
is an acceleration build. We can
Yeah.
argue over
Yeah.
whether the card itself is or isn't, but it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the
Okay.
the
Or rather
strategy.
And you guys,
specifically, so we
what would be a
and
stamina build?
this
Like
is
just for the viewers.
yeah, it's a topic that we might cover some other time, but
Sure.
that I
Yeah.
think we just don't have the time for now. But for example, a drill build is what me and Sixten would usually call a combo board because it combines acceleration and stamina to make it so that the engine keeps going so quick that almost the longer the fight goes, the more you're favored because your uh, X of uses on the drill is just so overwhelming compared to whatever you're up against that it doesn't matter.
For
Right.
sure,
So
most good boards are good at least two of the things.
Yeah,
I
whereas
would
my
say, yeah.
Arbalest builds, that's more what happens when you combine force and acceleration, because I'm trying to accelerate the Arbalest to just outright kill the opponent with raw force, but I do have poor stamina because technically, if they survive 6 shots of my depth charge Arbalest, I'm out. I'm done, I can't win.
And tankiness and force would be a fixer-upper build, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, or
exactly.
double
Yes,
whammy. I think
yes.
double whammy is probably the prime. Like
Yeah,
basically, you know,
definitely.
just
Mhm.
having
Force
a ton of
tankiness is
health.
like pig builds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because double whammy specifically is an item that converts health, which is one of the avenues of tankiness, into force. So when you're turning your tankiness into force, you're naturally really good at both of them.
And a force plus acceleration pig build might be like Pig's Gym, is like force plus acceleration.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it gets out of control so fast
Yeah.
if they have Adelodal or Caltrops or both, and with like
Yo-yo.
big ego, it's yeah.
Yeah.
And finally,
Yo-yo is also great with that.
like a pure heal build would be stamina and tankiness. Like imagine like Money Tree or something that just tries to like a pacifist build,
Yeah,
right?
full
Like that is
pacifist pig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're just trying
Right.
to say, I'll outlast something with poor stamina by just making sure that you will run out of stuff and then I win.
Those are
Yeah.
kind of in a bad position right now. Remember when Vineyards used to be
Yeah.
a different card? We could play a lot of those pacifist builds. I used to love playing them. Now it's a bit difficult.
But I think it's interesting as well. I will bring up, so I've kind of moved us over to the state of the meta because that's sort of what we started slipping into. But I do think that a concept that unites many of these builds, which is what Aska talked about with force field kind of needs to kill by the second hit. I like to call those two volley kill builds, which is also, interestingly enough, what I consider most Arbalest and Keg builds to fall into the same archetype. Because in this game, a lot of the time, you can design boards to say, I'll have 2 shots at killing you. The first time my board goes off, and then depending on, with Arbalest, you usually have more force on the second volley, or with Force Field, you usually have less force on the second volley. But you're still doing
Depending on
kind
the
of the
skills.
yeah, depending on the skills. But you're usually doing the same sort of thing where what you're trying to do is just designate a very specific window of this is where my build is trying to kill you.
Yeah, and then go all into it and like build everything around it. I think that's what makes successful boards.
And I
in
do
the
think it
bazaar.
is noteworthy that those boards are especially relevant right now, because I think Pygmalion is in a very powerful position due to the things that have exponential scaling or really aggressive scaling have been tuned down a lot. We used to have infinite knives, or we had really overpowered sharp corners dually, like stuff like that. Much less of it now, which means that there are much higher odds of Pig's late game really large health pool actually mattering.
They're also really strong with freeze late game. Like when you see a pig on day 14, you just feel bad you haven't had enough tempo to win the first a couple of days of day of fight, because even if you have a really good build that would be a 10 gold victory or a diamond victory, without the first tempo, you're probably going to lose to the pig on day 14.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
But
we
the,
should
the
we
amount
should
of
tempo is so
crazy,
important.
we should
yeah,
mention that the pig, a lot of the pig free stuff, the most egregious card, Cold Room, was nerfed in the hotfix. So I think, to me, I haven't played against enough pig opponents post hotfix to, I think, totally evaluate how strong they are now. I mean, they were nerfed, so they're definitely weaker than they were. But I do think that the
Yeah.
freeze pig stuff is still potentially very powerful.
But I do
It's so hard to
also
see because it's so you just don't face it that often because not everyone has the cards.
I think we can
So I think
also
Aska
still
brought. Sorry,
yeah.
go on, Metal.
Oh yeah, I was just
No, go
gonna
on.
say I think we can still kind of evaluate it too from the two most important pig boards that I think we still have more experience with in terms of Fixer Upper and Double Whammy. And I think, especially in the late game, when we're getting to those days we're talking about, like day 14, a lot of the time in card games, you'll bring up another concept, which is called questions and answers, which is that you can describe an enemy board as kind of posing a question, or you can call it like, go fishing, or whatever you want to call it. But um,
Yeah,
double
because
whammy pig,
there's no wrong questions, only wrong answers. That's
yeah,
the
it pretty much says, for example, say the double whammy goes off after 10 seconds, they don't have any form of acceleration, but they have a pawn shop on board and they have 35,000 health. A lot of the time, the question posed is simply, can your build do 35,000 damage in 10 seconds? And if the answer is yes, you win. If the answer is no, you lose. And I think especially Pig has traditionally oftentimes been the character that most distinctly poses very specific late game questions where if the answer is no, you're probably screwed if you get to that day.
He literally starts every game with a question. Have you noticed I'm huge? Like that is his questionnaire.
yeah. And not all Jabalians are pacifists, and then he smacks you with a double whammy for
That's true.
1000 k
It's
damage.
true.
Yeah, but
But I
that's
have
just
to
the
say,
you're
Aska,
so
go
real
on, go
for
on.
that one.
I was just about to say that my favorite example of how I got countered, I love to play big whammy. It's very satisfying to me to big bong. Like in real life, I'm a tiny person. And then imagining myself being like an 80k pig health
Yeah.
player hitting everybody with a double whammy is fun. So I had 80k health and we were on stream and I had an obsidian double whammy with the phonograph that was going off on 3.6 seconds. So I got the double whammy to 3.6 seconds and I was very proud of myself. And I was expecting like a dually to perma freeze me with a freezer small item, but that didn't happen. What happened was a guy who had the skill on Vanessa to get extra ammo. He had the boulder on his
Yeah.
board and he had 3 silencers. Each of the silencers was enchanted with a different enchant, and I didn't even get to get my double whammy to go off in the first 3.6 seconds. He hit me for like 1000k damage before I got off for 3.3 seconds.
And I do think
And that
that's
was impressive
actually
for me.
it's a really good example of the types of Vanessa boards that you might want to be on the lookout for pivoting into in the late game, as they are boards that answer questions, and it's usually Boulder
Exactly.
and it's notably Keg as well, as they
Oh,
scale with
Radiant
enemy
Keg.
health.
Yeah,
I
not
don't
Radiant
kill
radiant,
the
Keg,
just
Radiant Kegs.
obsidian
yeah,
one, just the
and
one shot. Like you,
oftentimes
Yeah.
even just Deadly Keg might get the job
yeah, or
done.
just crit. Yeah, I,
But
I,
it
I do
won't
think
kill a
that, yeah.
fixer upper. It will not kill a fixer upper because they will have more health than their health pool
And
is. So, like a
that's where it
Radiant
gets
Keg is just.
interesting. I did actually beat a Fixer Upper Pig on day 14 2 days ago with a unenchanted keg without crit. And it's because the board that I had was heat ammo with or heated shells with dive weights, arbalest, and keg,
Oh
and
God.
you just have the keg go off at the start, deal the flat 50%, but now you've already applied like a reverse belt. You've reduced the question from being 30,000, 35,000 to 17, 18,000, a much more manageable number. And then within about 9 seconds, it's slightly less. So the arbalest with some cooldown reduction usually end up at like 7-ish seconds. But the dive weights will haste it from 3.5. So the first activation is at about 5 seconds, the second activation is about 8. And by the second activation, I crit them for I think 17,000. Which just kind of meant that because my barrel had reduced the threshold I needed to hit, or my keg had reduced the threshold I needed to hit from 35,000 to 17,000 or thereabouts, they just died. They had gold defense grid, fixer upper build, and it just tore through their entire health pool in sub 10 seconds.
I mean, I think it's a good thing that the way you fight Pig as Vanessa with percent HP damage is different than the way the way you fight Pig as Dooley is with item with like crowd control, right? You have the way you beat Fixer as Dooley is
You freeze
instantly
it.
freeze their picture,
Yeah.
their Fixer, and then slow it, then just kill them before it goes off, or it gets to go off like one time and then you kill them. Um, Whereas like I like that the solution for Vanessa is like the opposite, right? It's like Vanessa has way more game against 40k HP than Dooley does, but I would say the like Dooley has a lot of game against Fixer Upper because I think it's easier for Dooley to get like a start of combat CC chain like a true like I disrupt your whole board instantly. I think that's easier to get on Dooley. So I
So,
like that the
um,
answers are different and that the answers to the questions posed by Pig are different by per character, and also that like Pig has two builds that are pulling in opposite directions. In a way, Double Whammy is almost like the opposite build of Fixer, right?
Yeah.
Fixer builds don't have a lot of HP. They have low HP, and they've spent their whole game pumping all their resources into this one item shield, right? So it makes sense that it's disrupted by item disruption from Dooley, whereas the HP
But
pig
even if
has spent the whole game pumping their all their resources into their HP bar. And you can kind of see how you need a different answer for each. And I think
Yeah.
that's actually really successful from a game design perspective. So
But I don't
I
think
really
a
like
dually
that.
can solve. A dually cannot solve a fixer upper that gives you 2k poison in a second because you don't have a big health pool. Like even if it goes once, you're done.
I think
I
Yeah,
feel like
you just have to race it, right? You have to CC it
I'm curious to
and
sort
race
of
it.
pick your brain on this, Walter, because I've at least felt like Dooley's biggest issue after a lot of his nerfs has been that his start of combat acceleration has sort of continually suffered. That it's become harder and harder to get your build to have a start time that goes under not just Fixer Upper, but also Silencer Vanessa boards, who are also very noteworthily
So
far
I
less
think it's
affected by
like
the bonk.
it's true that it's technically harder because a lot of your items are slower, but I think that Dooley has the best access to start of so like the thing to understand is that like if you already like all these different status effects for so like you want to have slow in your on your dually board, you want to have freezes on your dually board, you want to play Isochord freezer, you want to play, and you of course want to play haste, like metronome is one of the best dually cards, so you're already predisposed to trying to get a bunch of different effects, and when you combine those with the one-time freeze skills, that means that you have the best like start because you can go icicle, you can go magma core, you can go, there's cards available if you're knowing what to look for and you prioritize the start of combat acceleration, and that is what for Dooley that is what is most important in the late game. in the late game, you must start faster than your opponent, or you're almost certainly not
Also,
going
so
to.
give us like your hottest tips. What do you go for to
So
achieve
I
that
could
start
chime in
combat
here with force
acceleration?
field
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the biggest issue with force field is in the late game is your start window. Like
Mhm.
your weakness is never like the fact you cannot kill them. Like usually you have solved the shield question. That is the first problem, of course, having enough shield. But once that is solved, the problem is that the force field takes 5 seconds. So one way you can solve it is with CDR, of course, like feathers on or wings on the force field, get it down to 4 seconds. Another is by hasting it, and there are a lot of clever ways. One way, for example, is to have an icicle, as Walter mentioned, and then you pick up invigorating cold. And for those that don't know, invig goes from left to right. So if you place your force field on the
Do we
left,
know if that's a bug or intended?
I just know
I
it
think
works that
I
way.
think it's a bug, but it
Yeah,
but
I,
it
I
works
know
that
it's
way.
I know it's
At least for now.
consistent, but I didn't know if we'd had ever
So
any like official like is it
I don't think they've
supposed to
ever
or
addressed
not?
it. No.
Yeah.
I
don't
hope
think
they
they've
don't
ever
fix it
addressed
because I think this raises the skill. Like I like that it's
Yeah,
not
it's just
random.
that
Like I
it
would
needs to
prefer,
be in
yeah.
the text if it's
Sure.
working that way.
I
Yeah.
really like that it's that way because it allows you to do clever. It's the same with weather glass. You have to be creative with the positioning. So a positioning I like is if I have like a gold invig, then it takes 2 items. So then I have force field and I have a battery, and now they have nerfed battery by not bonking battery. They have kind of nerfed it. So now the battery will go off 1 second before the force field. So it will waste some of the charges, but I still play it because I'm so desperate for an extra second of start, or
Yeah,
rather,
me too.
yeah.
You're
Like
So
battery
basically
and
just
force field is so good.
unbonking your force field.
yeah, so I unbunk it to 4 seconds, but then it's also hasted, so I get like a maybe like 2.5 or 3 second start time instead or something like that with Invig and Icicle. Another way you can do it is Uzi is now 2 seconds. So that's the fastest non-atomic clock item that Dooley has. So you can do Uzi with like metronome next to the force field, and then it becomes I think it's like let me think for a second. Sorry.
That would make it 3.5,
So
I think.
yeah, 3.5 or something like that. Second start time, and then
And then the
you can
battery
also
goes to reduce by
yeah.
4, and so the
What about
second trigger is
You can
at
also haste the battery.
4.
Like there are a lot of
Uzi and optic fibers?
yeah. I was gonna
Ah,
complete.
yeah,
So fiber
yeah.
optics is that is the
Yeah.
rare, but there are like a lot of clever ways. Then there are like some really crazy stuff you can do. Like you can, for example, if you manage to enchant it with fiery, you can find I like
Quick ignition,
picking.
yeah.
Yeah,
Quick
I like
ignition.
clicking quick ignition just
Yeah.
in the off chance that I get fiery on either my battery or on my force field or just in general. And then there is the most galaxy brain thing I've ever done, which I mentioned on Snacer stream, is I click a quad. So it's called like there's like a skill you get quite frequently that says when you use an aquatic item, haste a weapon.
Yeah, from
Okay.
Loan
Crushing
Shark drops
waves,
it.
yes.
Yeah, from Loan
yeah,
Shark.
Loan
So
Shark. Yeah.
if I already have my defense grid at a good level, I will click that, and then I will go to Pearl or Vanessa and buy like a Clamra or another fast
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Oh
aquatic
God.
item, and that way I make the only weapon I play is force field, and that way I get haste that way. But the best way I think is mixed message, and this is a super powerful skill. It says when you use a non-weapon, charge a weapon. I believe like 2 seconds or something.
1
Such a
second.
It's
strong,
1 second.
such a
Yeah.
strong
But
skill.
if you make sure that force field is your only weapon, and then you have like first aid, and you have nitro, a bunch of crap,
Yeah.
you can like giga charge it, right? So there are a lot of like these. The thing you have to
It works with T-Rex as well. Very good.
yeah, exactly. And so the big skill, like the thing you have to master is after like day 8-ish, you need to figure out ways to like lower the start time of your force field. And this is where the fun is for me because there are so many creative solutions to solve this. Like I feel like every game I have a new crazy way to solve it.
Yeah,
And
and drill
another thing,
is the same way, right? Like you
oh
have to
yeah,
do
for
the
sure.
same thing for drill, and that's
It's a
kind of
bit
the
less
fun of
important on
the
drill.
yeah.
So on drill wise less important is because the drill, like if you lose your
People
shield,
get
it's
going.
over. Yeah, like force field like because force field dies without shield, it is it's so important that your opponent doesn't deal any damage to you. In a
That's
drill
because
build,
of the duct
you
tape.
can still
Like
yeah,
with the duct tape, we used to
Yeah.
prolong fights with it. Now we can't.
exactly. So now with power drill, it is still important, but if your opponent like removes your shield on a drill build, you can still of course win. The other thing I want to circle back to is that Aska made a really great point earlier about how important tempo is in this game, and I was curious like do any of you guys want to try and define what tempo means in this game for like viewers? Because it's a term
Yes.
we have borrowed from
Yeah,
other
I would like to.
sources.
I
So
I
would like
can
to.
Walter
can.
maybe?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I would describe it tempo as the strength of your board plus the strength of your economy relative to that point in the game. So it is not to do necessarily so it's not actually to do with whether or not you win or lose your PvP fight. It's what to do. It's whether to do with like how strong is your board plus your stash. Like imagine if you and all the other players were running a race, right?
So I think
Tempo is how far you are in that race towards 10 wins.
I can
And
kind of reframe it in a really useful way because I'm sure a lot of people who come into the bazaar have experience with previous card games. And if you do, you know that we've borrowed the term tempo from card games, which usually
well, it's really
refers
from
to.
chess, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm from chess as well, but it's exactly what Walter describes it as, is that in those games it's how you are positioned compared to your opponent relative to the turn in the game. And I think the one thing that you have to recontextualize for the bazaar is that the turn is sometimes the hour, but especially the day. So you have to analyze the entire run as your match and the day as your turn, and then apply the sort of regular concept of tempo that Walter describes, and it makes perfect sense. But you have to
Yep,
kind of
definitely.
recontextualize it like that.
So I
Like,
would say that this is by far the meta where tempo, like in terms of the game's history, now tempo is like the most important currency to have. I don't know why that is, but I feel like I am clicking chocolate bars. I'm going for just ensuring that I'm strong as possible more than ever. Like, so I'm curious if any of you can like is the bonkening like
No, so
why has it been like this?
I
Do
can
you
tell you
when
why. It's because you play
okay.
Dooley and not Pig.
Yeah, I know. So Pig doesn't care about tempo. That I know,
So
but
I
that means
think it's
like
mainly just the thing you have to evaluate is just each character's relative power level scaling over time. Where
I
Dooley
would say
is,
Dooley, yeah.
yeah, Dooley is
I would I
really
Definitely
would say
good
cares
that
about
early.
tempo.
okay, I can give an explanation. My explanation
Yeah,
is that the more balanced the game is, the between the characters and between builds, the more important tempo is.
yeah,
So when the meta was all you have to do is find Monitor Lizard and that's 10 wins, then tempo barely matters because all
yeah.
you have to do is find the Monitor Lizard and there's your 10 wins. So it doesn't matter. The more balanced the builds are against relative to one another, the more those chocolate bars matter because the closer the fights are. If if every
Yeah.
fight is a one-way blowout, then it really doesn't matter if you eat chocolate
And
bars,
it
right?
also
If
kind
every
of
fight is a close race, then it matters a lot.
it sort of twofolds factors in to how reliable your early game is, because whenever you can guarantee um if I find X, I probably get to 10 wins, like Monitor Lizard, or in a lot of metas, it's been like Shipwreck, or
or fixer
for
upper
a
for
time it
Pig.
was,
Fixer
yeah,
upper,
like
Yeah,
Jesus,
Fixer Upper.
fixer
rewards it.
upper.
It
Like if you
basically
find those
means
items, you
that
don't care about tempo anymore. Like
you
Pig just
you
lost the
want
first
to,
5 days.
yeah, you want to
Yeah.
maximize your odds at finding the item rather than maximize your odds at like each
Winning the
individual
day,
step of the
yeah,
way.
winning the day.
But as soon as the late game starts to become more rock paper scissory and things like that, where you don't know, oh, is this pig gonna be fixer upper or double whammy or freeze board, and you feel like you can't reliably close out, the difference between having to win 3 PvPs and having to win 2 PvPs can be night and day. And then you're really gonna wish that you had the chocolate to win
Yeah.
that one more encounter early to close out
Early.
at 10
Yeah.
instead of 9, because it's such a big difference. Like, 9 wins feels so terrible.
Yes. Always disappointing. But I have to say that it's a good sign that we're going into a more balanced state of the game, that we're talking
Yeah.
about tempo, because I think it's really another dimension where you can be creative with your builds, because it's another thing to think about.
For sure.
For me, I feel like in the beginning, while you're learning items and like what goes off of what trigger, how everything works, probably when you master that part of the game, that's when you start worrying about tempo, I guess.
Yeah.
You start worrying less about the items and more about the tempo if you have it or not.
And
Yeah, and I think that the more viable builds, so the more viable builds there are, so like what happens is that when you quote unquote naturally find powerful cards just by going to the shops you were going to anyway and don't really have to search very hard, that means you are going to have good tempo. So like in a game where everything just comes together for you, like you're finding the exact items you want, you're naturally going to have good tempo in that game because you didn't spend a bunch of resources searching for your items. And so the more different viable builds are, the more it makes sense to embrace the items that come to you naturally and turn those into your final build, and the less incentivized you are to go to every shop to search for the one OP item. And I think a lot of people want the Bazaar to be a game where you kind
Or
of
they force.
play the cards you're dealt, right? And you play them as well as possible. Not that pivoting shouldn't be possible or changing shouldn't be possible, but rather that things are close enough together in power level such that you can go for what you're given, and if you play it well, if you play it with tempo and like win your rounds and like build your board a little bit at a time with the cards that are coming to you, that strategy is also powerful in addition to finding the most OP thing and then just crushing everyone in the late game.
in other
Because
words, playing
they're kind of like balanced.
the second best board well should do better than the best
Yes,
board done poorly.
exactly,
Yes,
exactly.
that would be the
Yes.
ideal.
But with all that said, great discussion. We're gonna have to move on to board of the week before we start closing this down. Before I show the board in question, which Aska provided, I will mention for any listeners, we do have a email, a bazaar podcast at gmail.com, where you can submit your own board of the week if you feel like being featured on the show. But today, Aska has brought us this wonderful Dinosaur final board. That's not something you see every day. Do you want to quickly give us a rundown on it?
Yeah, definitely. So for this board, I think this was like the night of the update. So Wednesday, right when the server started working, and I wanted to test whether friend core is alive or not. And I did struggle early with friend core only giving haste to adjacent items, but then what happened? Day two, I ran into a dinosaur, and I was thinking, oh my god, if there's ever a time to run into a dinosaur, so if any of the listeners don't know what the item does, she's capable of eating a different amount of small items on your enemy's board. And I'm thinking that right now in the current meta, a lot of builds revolve around small items to either get them started or to have them go like longer into the fight. And then, like, let's say silencers, I was thinking I want to eat as many silencers as possible, and then she builds up damage over time. So what I noticed was that getting her on day two was an interesting experience, because a lot of the NPC fights did not have enough items for me to even utilize her skill on day two. And like my opponents also didn't run enough items in general for me to be able to get the dinosaur to work. So then I started thinking, is this the right idea or not? And then I started forcing fights. And then early when I saw my first gold shop, that was like day 7, I thought, oh my god, robotics factory is going to solve my issue. And then I just found it, and immediately I got like a enchantment to use on my items. And I was thinking, where should I put an enchantment? And Robotics Factory would be perfect as a target, right? With Turbo. So I managed to get Turbo because the chances of the enchantments you're going to get on your Robotics Factory is lower. Like you can't enchant it with everything. So the chance of getting something good is higher, like shiny or turbo on it. And then when we got turbo, I just realized that the robotics factory just became much better than the friend core. And if I took out the friend core and I added an extra damage source, which would scale out of haste, thus the bronze, not bronze, silver Bellalista that was there just to support me for healing, it became such a fast board. And I remember like every single fight I would go against like something. Oh, my favorite was when the last fight I think was the ladle, the new pig item that scales really high in burn damage, right? And then the Dianosaur immediately with a double cast got both the matches and the ladle down from the freeze pig, and the freeze pig couldn't get the board started. A lot of new players, I think they're not ready for item destruction, and that's what Dianosaur and Mamasaur bring to the board. That's why I like playing them so much.
There you go. You heard it here first. Turbo Robotics Factory is the new companion core.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
this
much
does look
better.
like a sick board. It's very cool. I love the
Yeah, I
Turbo
agree.
Robotics Factory. It's very nice.
I do think
I
it.
had another. I had
Yeah,
another
I
board
can
that is
show
even
the other
better
one as
here.
well. Let's
Oh,
see.
not that one. I didn't take
Oh, you got a
sadly, I
separate
didn't
one.
have.
Yeah, you wanna send it? I can show
I
you.
haven't. I haven't sent it because I haven't had the screenshot of it. It
Oh
was
yeah, you wanna just describe
before you
it?
guys
Yeah.
told me about. Yeah. So it was a Mamasaur board, but I had fiber optics
Mm-hmm.
on my board as well, and it started like munching everything so fast, and even like depth charges. The thing is, I
Yeah.
ran into a lot of depth charge and cold room opponents on days 12 and 11, and it just annihilated those boards. The difference between playing a Mamasaur versus a Dianosaur as your core carry would be which items you're fixated on destroying, right? Mamasaur gives you an option to destroy middle-sized items, and those are like core items. I'm talking about sniper, rowboat, anything like the death charge, the whatever, a cutlass, double barrel, cold room, collateral, crook, belt. It destroys everything.
Yeah,
And
and
that's why I think that item is so good.
I do think that's a really
Fine.
common just general trend is that at the start of a new expansion or patch or whenever new things happen, people can get away quite a lot with slower strategies like depth
Yeah.
charge. Even pre-nerf, it was 8 seconds at best, and something that since you wanted to scale it with the Yeti crab, you oftentimes wanted it to go off twice, which then you're looking at 8 seconds with haste, 16 without. Now that's gonna be up to upwards of 20. And it usually goes really well when boards aren't that optimized yet. At that point, just having a big impact can do a lot more than having a fast start. But then people bring out the disruption. They bring out the Momosaur, and
Yeah.
suddenly going off that slowly is just not going to cut it because someone's going to find a way to kick your sandcastle and then throw you in the sea.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think is called destruction or disruption. I mean both. Is extremely potent when there aren't builds like Monitor Lizard, like pre-nerf or Fixer Upper, like when there aren't builds that just basically kill you, like not instantly per se, but just set like a death sentence on you within 5 seconds. Stuff like Momasar, which just removes their scaling forever, is extremely powerful. Like Dam is another example. Like Dam and Momasar, those effects are so strong in slower metas where it's all about, long-term scaling. So I think that why Aska has had success here is probably because we see less of those kind of, infinite start of game poison combos. So I'm curious. I'm gonna try and experiment more with like companion core friends because I haven't played that yet. So yeah, that was a really
Yeah,
cool
and I
board.
will mention that's kind of the same reason why I think I've been having the success that I have with Arbalest Vanessa, and both Force Field Dooley and Drill Dooley operate on similar principles of if you're identifying that a lot of people are doing things that are slow, and you say, if you can't kill me in 6-7 seconds, I'm going to just outright end the fight. Very powerful in those types of metas.
I have to say, I noticed that what countered me most when playing around Mamasaur and Dianosaur was slow. But then,
Mm,
as you get through dually boards, like in later days, you kind of stop relying on haste and you start relying on charge.
yeah,
So if
Yes.
you
yeah.
can get your boards going off of charge, you're just skipping over the slow effects.
for sure, Momosaur is one of the best anti-drill boards. Actually, it's
Yes.
good against the drill.
Caltrops is the anti-drill
Okay,
board,
well,
though.
yes, Kartrop. We don't talk about that card.
We
don't
don't
like
mention
that
that
card
word on
here.
this stream. This is a family-friendly stream. No mention of that.
Oh, but
It's so sad when a whole no matter how hard you think about your board and you're like meticulous about building it and you're so proud of it,
Yes.
and then like a toy called Caltrops just wrecks it.
I had this literally happened just on stream. I had like a super cool. I think Walter Coolest probably was in chat. Like a super cool motherboard build, like the coolest I've ever built with like what's it called, a Sixten or something. I was like at 8 wins, super excited, and I lose to Caldrops instant. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I have like a
Definitely
1,000
doesn't
damage.
matter.
Yeah,
It's
the
core.
killer.
No.
It's the killer of fun, the enemy of fun.
Killer of fun.
And
Well-
also, the worst feeling is when you go for a risky fight in the mountain pass, and you're so proud of yourself, you're gonna get a risky fight, and then it's the void golem, and you have a drill
Yeah.
board, and you go like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
All right, so socials.
Yes,
Aska, if you want to,
I'll start off just by mentioning the podcast. Always we try to upload on Sundays, and we try to have it available on YouTube as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and via RSS feed. And with all that said and done, Aska, you can start off with where can people find you?
Right. Well, you can find me on my Twitch channel. So AskaAndTheWolf is the name. Usually, I'm there on schedule. Let's say, what is my time zone? European time
UTC
zone.
+1 if you're in the same time zone as
Thank you.
us.
UTC +1 at 2 o'clock on work days. I don't stream on weekdays, but other than that, I despise social media. So I'm thinking maybe I'll appear on any other platform. But for now, I see you guys on Twitch.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do, but I'm trying to figure out how to use a YouTube channel. I feel peer pressured by my friends who are surprised about my very fast Twitch success so far. And they're saying that I should have a YouTube channel and have proper pictures taken of me and things like that. But I'm slowly developing it. So let's say I'm going to try to work on the YouTube channel growing as well.
Yeah, fair enough. And Sixten?
Yes, you can find me at Twitch, 2610, and same handle on YouTube. And then you can also, of course, find me on my Discord server. I think we probably link it in the description. Yeah, that covers my stuff.
And Walter?
You can find me in 610's Twitch chat.
And
That's
me
it.
myself, I am MetallFenix at both Twitch and YouTube. Currently no videos on the YouTube, but as I'm having a lot of fun with this meta, I'm gonna try to stream a bit more. And when I stream a bit more, hopefully I have more things to upload to YouTube, but remains to be seen. And in any case, with all that said and done, thank you so much for watching A Bazaar Podcast, and we'll see everyone next week for another episode.